Is Hollywood really all that bad? Well, we're going to talk about that and more on today's episode of the Geek Watch podcast.
This is the Geek Watch podcast with Brian Hatcher and Mandy Petrie.
Greetings, Geek Watchers, and welcome to episode 212 of the Geek Watch podcast. I'm Brian Hatcher, and with me, as always, Geek Watch's own resident geek goddess, Mandy Petrie.
Hello, Brian.
So we have come to the crossroads because now we have a bunch of new stuff that's starting. Dune Part 2 is starting today.
On Leap Day, because we're recording on Leap Day.
Yes, that's starting today, and the new Walking Dead series.
Yes.
And that started, and of course, there's, for some strange reason, although there haven't been a lot of new trailers, there's been a lot of news. Mostly because of behind-the-scenes things that are going on in studios right now. I would say we're definitely in a transitional period. And this is going to be maybe a part 2 or a part 2.5 of some stuff we were talking about last week. Because studios are trying to pivot because movies haven't been so good recently.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of this I want to discuss with you, but besides the existential crisis that I've been suffering over the last couple of weeks, and of course, the influence of your geek-colored glasses.
Yes.
But also, there's a book that I have been reading that's called Status and Culture. It's by W. David Marx. And it is about how culture develops, how status has been a part of it for a long time, but toward the end of the book, he gets more into how the internet has changed status signaling and how that is shifting and how the paradigm of what culture is and what's popular has changed because of the internet. And I'm about done with it. I've probably got about maybe a half hour's reading left to finish it. And I feel like I'm going to turn back around and start it over again and read it again because I found it really fascinating. It's really helped explain a lot of what I feel like has been going on, not just in movies and television, but culture in general. Mm-hmm. Because there has been a shift on what becomes popular, why it becomes popular, how long it stays popular, when does something become a classic. I have been doing a lot of thinking about what I would say the dialogue has been when it comes to Hollywood and dialogue that I've fed into myself. We've gotten to a place in Hollywood now where there's this belief that Hollywood executives are a bunch of idiots who have no idea what they're doing. They don't know what's popular. They're out of touch, and they just have no idea what makes a good movie anymore. But there have been good movies that have come out. We went to see The Iron Claw. We've talked about that before.
Yes.
And it's in streaming now. And just in case you were like, I want to cry again.
If I want to cry again, yeah.
And I have to say, over the last week, I have fallen down this rabbit hole of going on YouTube and seeing these reaction videos of people who are watching this for the first time. And it's funny because many times these videos will start out with someone saying, well, I don't know what this movie's about, but I know it's about wrestling and Zac Efron's in it.
Oh.
And I know the minute they say that, I'm in for a treat because they're not ready.
No.
They're absolutely not ready. And people...
Let's watch High School Musical and Cinderella make out. That's...
Yeah. As depressing and sad of a movie that this is, I mean, it's a good film.
It's a great movie, yes.
It's an amazing film.
It's heartbreaking and heart-wrenching and... Yes, but it's beautiful. It is a beautiful movie. The acting is fantastic. The story, it's beautifully told. Mm-hmm. It's a tragic story, but it's beautifully told.
Seeing some clips online of Kevin Von Erich and his opinions on this film. And he did say the one part of the movie that just broke him was that scene toward the end when the brothers...
We'll be your brother's dad.
Yeah. Well... The one that he was talking about was when his brothers get back together, you know.
Oh, in heaven. Okay.
Yeah.
No, I was thinking about the little boys.
Oh, that too.
But yeah, they all reunite. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
See, just talking about it now, I'm wanting to tear up. If you haven't seen this movie, Geek Watchers, I don't know if I want to recommend it, but it's beautiful. It's a wonderful movie, but it's going to tear your heart to pieces.
Yeah. I would definitely recommend it. I think more people need to watch it. But again, the narrative about Hollywood that in a lot of ways on this very podcast I fed into has been shattered by this movie because it is a movie. It's not part of a franchise. We're not going to see Iron Claw Part 7. It's like, I don't know if we could take that. But it's self-contained. It has beginning, middle, and end. You don't need any more of that story. It's a self-contained movie. And it was done by a Hollywood studio that knew what the heck it was doing. Now it's A24, and A24 has been
they're
willing.
a special studio.
They are special. But, Warner Brothers is coming out with Dune Part 2, and everyone's excited about that. Mm-hmm. Marvel's coming out with Deadpool and Wolverine, and people are excited about that. So where is the true narrative? Is Hollywood washed up? Are they completely out of touch? Or do they still have the ability to put out great movies? Because it looks like they are. Mm-hmm. But we have all these issues going on behind the scenes. Disney, this was just announced. Bob Iger, he's shifting everything around. Sean Bailey, the head of Disney's film department, after 14 years, and I'm doing finger quotes when I say this, has resigned. He was fired, basically. Mm-hmm. So, and being replaced by the head of Searchlight, who it used to be Fox Searchlight. I don't know if you're familiar with that studio, but it was a subsidiary of Fox.
I seem to recall it. I couldn't name you a movie by them or anything, but I seem to recall them.
Yeah, they were very much like Miramax. They were a subsidiary of Fox, and for the smaller type pictures, the more independent films.
Yeah.
And the head of that, his name is David Greenbaum, and he is taking over as the Disney film head. So they're doing a lot of shifting there. And, of course, we've already talked about Iger's plan to cut back on a lot of films. And there's been a lot of this narrative going on right now about why there's this shift. And depending on who you talk to, you get why all this is happening. Everyone has their theories, and we'll leave it there.
And it all comes down to the industry is changing because the world is changing and technology is changing. We just had 2 big strikes over technology. Mm-hmm. Well, there were different things, but that was one of the big main things over technology. And we have to evolve. We have to change with that. Edison was making movies, and they were shit. And when people started making good movies, he got mad at them, so they had to change. They had to leave and do it differently. And then that was all in New Jersey, and then they had to leave and go to Hollywood to be able to make good movies. So we have to change. And there's going to be a whole bunch of reasons.
I've been doing a lot of study on this idea of narratives and story, and not just the stories in films, but the stories that are surrounding films. And one of the best examples of that, of course, is Madam Web. Because, again, this idea of this film that was so bad and people like Chris Stuckman and myself, and I'm not equating the two of us, and other people too, this idea of saying, look, there's no point in even reviewing this film. It's bad. It's obviously bad. There's nothing more to say about it. Everybody knows. And the story around him being a shill because he didn't review this film when, let's be honest, there was nobody who was going to go see this film unless Chris Stuckman had something to say about it. Okay.
Right.
It's not like he could have prevented someone from going to see this film. Mm-hmm. Everybody knew. But watching the narrative around this movie and all the explanations that have been presented about the film it's
a story in itself.
It is. Mm-hmm. I just saw recently, I was following this because I found it a little bit interesting. One of the actors in Madam Web, who played one of the Spider Women, Isabella Merced, she's playing Hawkgirl in the new Superman movie.
Oh, flipping over to DC, are we?
But she didn't say to anybody over at Sony that she was going to be working on this DC film. She thought there might be this possibility that Madam Web was going to be part of an ongoing series.
Right.
And she wanted to basically hedge her bets. she didn't want to lose the job because this idea of maybe she might get a job at DC. And she was like, no, I want all the roles.
Yeah,
So,
well, Rachel Ziegler, she did Hunger Games, she did Shazam, she did
oh, yeah.
now she's doing Snow White, so she's all over the board too. So
Yeah. There is this.
it's a good idea.
Yeah. So she was like, I want to get all of it. Of course, at this point, there's no danger that Madam Web's going to pull her away from any DC issues. I think that's one of the reasons why she's talking about it
Madam
now.
Web animated series and a Madam Web What If.
Maybe. Well, I actually right now, what I have heard is they're not touching Madam Web for over a decade. That was the quote. That was the quote. We're not going to see anything with Madam Web again for at least a decade, was the comment that was made.
It's going to take 10 years to get the taste out of people's mouths.
Maybe so.
But we got 3 Hulk movies in 7 years.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Well,
that's fine.
Yeah. But I brought that up because Isabella Merced made the comment that the reason why Madam Web didn't do so well was because of misogyny. And I gotta say something. Okay, I am not about to sit here and suggest there is no misogyny going on. Every time I get a small bit of peace and quiet, those idiots post another bunch of videos. So I never get to forget that those idiots are out there, right? But here's the thing. That wasn't why the movie didn't do so well. I saw the movie. It's a bad film. That's why it didn't do well. And to say that this movie had a chance of doing well, but it never got the chance, and this idea that we need to lay the blame of all of that at the feet of the He-Man Woman Haters Club is just as nonsensical as saying this same movie starring 4 white dudes would have been $1 billion franchise. No, it wouldn't have. This movie was simply bad, and that's why it didn't do well. I feel like one of the things Hollywood desperately needs to do is they need to remember it's the story, stupid. They have to get away from narratives, really on both sides, and just be interested in doing good movies. And if a movie is bad, you've got to be willing to say it's bad, regardless of what some idea that maybe there's a message in it that's important, or there's a message in it that shouldn't be there. Just getting back to just basically making good movies, I think, is going to be a huge part of it. But also, again, society is changing. This idea of memeing a movie to success, at the end of the day, especially with the amount of money that movies are costing now, there's this talk about how much this new Superman movie is going to cost. And people are freaking out about the price tag of this thing. I've had to reevaluate a lot of what I've thought about Hollywood in general, because the narratives that even I have weighed in on, this idea of basically Hollywood executives all being a bunch of idiots who are just completely out of touch, who've never talked to any kind of real human being since they've been locked up in their offices.
Oh, yeah.
In some cases, yeah, there are some movies that obviously they've been completely out of touch about, because there's no reason why Madam Web should have ever been released. You can look at that movie and go, it's not ready. I mean, anything could be fixed, I suppose, but the idea of having to go back and do reshoots, I think they did. There was a lot of stuff that felt like it was
tacked on.
Yeah. And you look at the Marvels that didn't do well, and I feel like there was a lot of stuff that was cut out of the Marvels, to be honest. Obviously, the villain wasn't that well developed. And I just have this feeling that there was more stuff in there that wound up hitting the cutting room floor for whatever reason. And this is what we got left. But again, there's really no way for me to know that. We've gotten away from the point where you just slap Marvel's name on a movie and you're just going to go see it. They've thrown us a few stinkers, and so now they've got to build that reputation back. Yeah. If they can. I just feel like this year is going to be a huge transitional period for a lot of things, because I am seeing more and more films coming out now that are not established IPs. And I've sat at this microphone for years saying that Hollywood needs to get away from doing IPs, that they need to start doing original stuff. And it looks like they're starting to lean that way, which is good, at least to my opinion, but that doesn't guarantee that the films that they make from these original IPs are going to be good. But Hollywood has to get some courage again, I feel.
Yeah, and if they do, and there's no expectation.
Mm-hmm.
We have this Fantastic Four movie. It's coming out, and everyone's thinks they know what they want in a Fantastic Four movie because of the past movies, because of the comic books, because of the TV shows, the cartoons, and everything.
Right.
Everyone has an expectation. You do something like Lisa Frankenstein. We don't know anything about this, so you don't have an expectation going in there. You didn't build it up in your head.
Right.
Everything, everywhere, all at once. We had no idea what that's going to be about.
And some people leaving still didn't know.
Still don't know, but still loved it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And for me, and it's funny you mentioned that because we've gotten our first pictures from this Crow reboot, and there have been some mixed reactions.
Mm-hmm.
Some people said, why are we watching The Crow meets the Joker because of all the tattoos and all of that?
Mm-hmm.
People are commenting on a lot of stuff from a few pictures, and I'm like, could we maybe give it a chance? Maybe just let's not run it down off of a couple of pictures, 2 or 3 pictures, but at the same time, what we've been fed recently, I can understand why people are going to be dubious, and if something seems out of kilter, they're not going to be willing to give anybody a chance.
Mm-hmm.
I get it. I understand it. Are we going to just quit watching movies altogether? Is that what we're going to do? Because over just the last couple of years, there have been some really good movies that have come out.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of them, and some of them have been really not good, but we're still getting them. Even for me, I feel like a lot of this has to do with negativity bias, and it's something that's natural with all human beings. It's like no matter what good happens, you remember the bad ones. Even if the good far outweighs the bad, it's the bad thing that happened that you're going to remember.
That's what you remember, yep.
Yeah, it's regardless of all the fun that I've had watching Marvel movies, I'm going to remember
one thing
the
sticks
Eternals.
with you.
the Eternals is going to be that movie that I never forget. There's just a lot that you just can't lay at the feet of the director or the actors in that film. Because, I mean, you look at this on paper, it's a Marvel movie being directed by an Oscar-winning director.
With
it should
award-winning actors.
With award-winning actors, yes. This should have been a slam dunk. To do what you do in Hollywood, you do have to be willing to take some chances, and they don't always pay off. But I don't think we're ready to scrap the entire movie-making industry quite yet.
Oh, no.
I think there's a lot more to offer, and it does seem like a good idea for Marvel to back off and go back to making a couple of movies a year and focus on telling story. Like I said, hopefully with the fact that we're getting the CEO of what was once Fox Searchlight and that attitude, maybe allowing creatives to be creatives again is going to be a good thing. Although, again, let's look at the other side. If you have somebody who's not good at their job and you just let them have full reign, you're going to get garbage in, garbage out. Just allowing creatives to do what they do, it's not a guarantee of quality. But at the same time, if you hire the right people, you get great stuff out of it. And so it's not the only thing to consider, but it's certainly more likely to get good results if you put the right people in the positions and you let them do what they do best. I think all of this is recoverable. I think in my old age, I'm becoming more optimistic.
Good.
And I think a lot of that's had to do with over the years seeing you in your geek colored glasses. I'm like, how could you possibly think this? It's like, you can't just give everything a shot, but you do. And
sure you can.
And
then when you watch it, then you realize just how bad it is. Then you can.
Yeah, it's not like it's not like there hasn't been stuff that you've seen that you. I mean, we're not going to go back to Dracula again.
We're talking about Dracula again.
But I'm hoping that Hollywood, and not just Hollywood, but the audiences also, that we can make this shift where we're not like emotionally invested so much personally in whether a film is good or bad. We can watch a film, enjoy it to the level that the movie has something to say and we can connect with it. If we're able to connect with it, then it's awesome. If we don't connect with it, maybe it's because it just wasn't made for us, or maybe it's because there were certain skills in the making of it that were lacking, or there was parts of the story that should have been there. Again, as a writer, I have a tendency of picking this stuff apart and going, they didn't do this at this certain point, and I can't help that. And that's just because of where I am as a creative. I look at stories and take them apart because I'm writing my own. And so I always go at it as analytical, but most people don't. Some people just watch a movie with their geek colored glasses on and say, okay, what you got for me? Because I have for so long have been on the creative side of things and taking things apart. I've forgotten, I think, the joy I would have of watching a good movie and being blown away by it. And like I said, I've fallen down the rabbit hole on YouTube of watching these reactions.
Oh, yeah.
But also other movies as well. Movies that brought tears to people's eyes. Of course, the two Stephen King movies that everybody talks about that they don't consider Stephen King movies are The Green Mile and The Shawshank Redemption. Which, have you seen either one of those?
Yes, both of them.
You've seen both of them?
Yeah.
And I always find it funny. Anybody starts talking about Stephen King movies and you bring those two up and that's their own thing. I'm like, they're Stephen King stories.
Yeah,
How is
they
it that?
are.
Yeah, but they're not typical. It's like, but he wrote them. They are typical for Stephen King. Maybe they're not what you think about. Stand By Me, same thing. It's one of those movies. It's a King movie, but we don't look at it like it's a King movie because
there's no scary clown. There's no aliens. There's no.
Yeah.
But blood getting poured over a prom girl or.
Yeah. But I've seen some videos of reactions to both of those movies. I've seen a bunch of reactions to My Cousin Vinny. Have you ever seen that movie?
Yes.
Yeah. Which I love that film just because, if for no other reason, Marissa Tomei pissed off a lot of people for winning the Oscar for that role. But again, you look at that character, Mona Lisa Vito, and when you first see her, I think this was actually her first big major role in a film. And she shows up on the screen with that accent, that Jersey accent, and you think you know who this character is the minute she opens her mouth. And as the film develops, you realize you don't know a damn thing about her.
She was layered. Yeah.
She was layered, and she was a lot smarter than even the audience.
Anyone gave her credit for. Yeah.
Yeah. And I find that really fascinating. And so I was watching a lot of reactions to that. There was a reaction video, and it was a bunch of different reactors. Somebody had done a compilation of a bunch of reactors who were watching Jaws.
Yeah.
And of course, there was the head scene, which was cool.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I found really shocking that I didn't expect for them to do, but I thought it was really fascinating, was there was a reaction to the Indianapolis scene.
Oh.
And it's just all these people watching this and just, you have Quint sitting there telling this story and no visuals, just him telling this story. Great acting, not just with Quint, but it's like the reactions that you were getting and the audience too. You're just swept away by the story. It's a fascinating and heartbreaking and scary story.
Yeah.
And is in the middle of this movie that, for all intents and purposes,
a monster movie.
Yeah, it should have been some B movie, and it's what the studio expected. We're just doing this like monster movie, but it's a natural monster movie because you're dealing with a shark. But you get so much more out of it.
And it's like two completely different films. You have the whole beginning, and then it's just the three of them out in the sea, which is a whole different movie altogether. They have their own story and their own character development, and that's such a powerful moment.
Yeah, again, there's a lot of good movies out there to revisit, and I feel like I had forgotten a lot of that. But again, the time when all these movies came out, there were movies that were in the theater that weren't that good.
People forget, looking back at the 80s, the music was so good, the movies were so good. I was like, you remember Purple Rain. You don't remember Rappin' Duke, who came out the same year, and how awful that song was. And there were some...
Oh, don't you dare talk about Rappin' Duke. God, that was my jam.
There were some great movies, but then there were just... the awful movies. Of course, I love those awful movies, especially the horror movies of the 70s and 80s that were just the blood and boobs era. Love those, but they're awful. They're just awful, but it's great.
But again, it delivered what you expected.
Exactly what you're expecting.
Exactly what you expected from it. But yeah, I do feel like, at least to myself, I feel like I have been in the process over the course of maybe the last few months of reevaluating how I look at movies and television as an art form and how I view it, how I critique it. If for no other reason, around once a week, we get together and I put a microphone in my face and talk about it with you. And I think a lot of this has had to do over the course of the two of us doing this podcast together.
Mm-hmm.
The way I looked at things, especially in the beginning, and the way that you did, was completely different. Mm-hmm. And listening to your viewpoint on a lot of this has made me shift the way that I look at things, and not as analytical and trying to tear something apart and figure out where the rotten parts of it happens to be. Is that at least at the beginning, you have to be willing to go into a piece of work, listen to what it's trying to say, take it in, enjoy it for what it is, and then later maybe become more analytical. And I feel like there's a lot of the critiques that happen, a lot of the movie critics, we'll call them critics, although a lot of them are just basically people giving their opinions.
Right.
It's a rom-com. I hate rom-coms, so I hate this movie. But I feel like where a lot of them fall to the wayside, they automatically go into it with this idea of how do we tear this thing apart? I'm going to watch this and I need to figure out what good things...
Immediately, everything that's wrong with it.
Yeah. What good things am I going to say about it? What bad things am I going to say about it? And going back to this book I've read about status and culture, this idea that if you're a reviewer, you give something a positive review when everybody else is giving it a negative review, or if you give something a negative review and everybody else is giving it a positive review, then you could lose your status as a reviewer because you're going off the beaten path. And so I think especially with how accessible a lot of these reviews are on YouTube and TikTok, it feels like it's eating itself. That people are waiting for other people to talk about it to figure out what they're going to say about it. And a lot of these reviewers, they're waiting to take the temperature of what the video sphere is saying and then weigh into it, or at least they adjust their opinion. I feel like a reviewer would feel really uncomfortable saying something like, oh, Madam Web was Shakespeare. People would look at it.
Well, it might have had some elements of the Scottish play in it, the three women. And
yeah, well, there you go. Well, there's actually 4, so it was like, it's one better than Shakespeare. But at the same time, I'm also of the mind to think if somebody went to this movie and loved it, what's the issue with them saying, I don't know what everybody else's problem was. It worked for me. Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe the editing was wonky. Maybe the dialogue didn't make any sense. Maybe the ending was anticlimactic or whatever, but holy crap, while I was there, I was in a theater by myself with my popcorn and nobody else was there. But while I was there, I had the time of my life. And if that was the truth, that's the truth. Mm-hmm. And especially if I'm going to continue to review things, I feel like I need to adjust the way that I look at things, if for no other reason than if I'm going to become a better artist myself, I feel like I have to make that shift, because otherwise I'm just going to be a negative Nelly. I'm just going to be that grumpy old man who, quite frankly, needs to get himself a pair of geek colored glasses and start to enjoy stuff again. Can I do that? Well, I guess we'll see.
We shall see.
And with that said, we come to the end of episode 212. Thank you for listening, and tune in next time for the latest in geek news and views with the Geek Watch podcast. From Mandy Petrie, this is Brian Hatcher, reminding all the Geek Watchers out there, we're all geeky about something. Be proud of yours. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Geek Watch podcast. If you enjoyed this program, don't forget to like and subscribe on your preferred platform and share this podcast on your social media. For links to all the ways you can listen to the Geek Watch podcast, as well as leave comments and suggestions, visit our website at geekwatch.net. The Geek Watch podcast is a Hanging J production.